Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming along if you're watching. Basically, tonight's live stream will be on, hang on, this has just popped up. You can now pin a message. Okay. Basically, it was just a note out there about how pinning pinned messages from the moderator of chat on my YouTube page, because this is going out on YouTube right now. And basically, book review this evening on let's start again. The Path to Rome by Hilaire Belloc, which Malcolm Mann is sharing with us. And with me, it's Sir Ranulph Fiennes' biography of Sir Ernest Shackleton, who I think a lot of people would agree is one of the finest polar explorers in history. I'm just going to do some housekeeping for a moment. Please bear with me. And I will sort that out. Hang on. Oh, just noticed something. Hang on. That's better. Okay. Now it's been too successful with this too early, because normally I'm still setting up when Malcolm arrives. Now Malcolm should be here about 8 o'clock. That's 4 minutes from now. I'm just sort of doing some quick tidying, make sure that there's leaks on Facebook, on Facebook and Twitter on this. But hopefully all will be well. So, but yeah, it's all. Yeah, hang on. I need to go on Twitter. Now, just bear with me. I'm just trying to do 2 things at once here, which is never good. But we do these monthly book reviews. Last month, I did one with former Guardian journalist Danuta Keane on. She brought forward a book on Putin. And mine was the latest biography of King George V by Jane Ridley. We should at some point be doing fiction as well. It's not all non-fiction, but it's pretty much a mixture of things and what takes our fancy at the moment. And it would be good to get more varied stuff. But at the moment, we have what we have, and I think it's a bit varied this evening. A book about conversion to the Roman Catholic Church, and a biography about one of the greatest Antarctic explorers we have ever had. And I don't think you can ask for too much with the choice there. But hopefully all will be well. So I'm just sharing this. Ooh. Just bear with me for a few moments. That clock's ticking. Yeah. Oh, that's why. Oh, why do these things always take longer than you think when? Where's it plug? And okay, just get rid of those two things. Talk about editing on the job. But hopefully all good. And just in time, I might add, because oh, maybe not. But I thought Malcolm would be coming in, but it's just a note about live streaming. But hopefully it's all going to, and just type this in. Yes. Okay. So hopefully Malcolm should be here any moment, and we'll get the ball rolling. As I said, we did a discussion on this last month with Danita Keane. I want to do further discussions. We also on Mars Hill blog do a series of film discussions as well, which monthly, which I always do with Malcolm. It's just a bit more varied with the book discussions. So next week, Malcolm and I will be discussing the film Amundsen, which is recently on the BBC, and the film that's currently out in the cinemas, Operation Mincemeat. So hopefully you'll join us. And Malcolm is with us now. And here we are. Good evening, Malcolm.
Hello, Paul. Good evening. How are you?
Fine. I seem to be slowly getting the hang of this. There's always that 5 minutes where I've got to keep talking to the audience while I'm still getting everything up. So I'm
right.
Concentrate on two things at once, which I'm never really good at. But that's all we have to suffer. That's all we have to suffer.
Oh, well done for doing it. Thank you for doing it as well.
So yes, we did. Alongside the monthly film reviews, I not doing the monthly book reviews, but I'm sort of branching out more with varied people and guests. Yeah. But I thought by rights, because you do such a sterling work with the film reviews with me, you ought to be a guest on this month at the least. And you've chosen a book by Hilaire Belloc.
That's it. This one.
The Path to Rome.
Yeah, that's the one.
And I've chosen, for which we'll discuss later, Sir Ranulph Fiennes' biography of Sir Ernest Shackleton.
Right. Fantastic.
Hopefully, but we'll start with yours.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What made you pick this book?
Well, it's one of my most favourites, and I know it inside out. Well, I like to think I do. I probably don't, but I do know it very well. I read it every year.
Yeah.
It's the one book, actually, that I read every year. Have done for the last, just last 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Although I first read it probably about 20 years ago. Just having a look. See, I didn't put my name in it when I bought it, so I can't tell. But yeah, around the turn of the century. So yeah, when you said book review, that was really the first book that came to mind. That's a book I could talk my own socks off about quite happily.
It's always good to do to pick a book that you know very much.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I suppose I could pick A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens because I read that
Right.
every Christmas between 21st to 25th December. But I'm going to hold back till December, I think, for that one.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So, what made you? What's it that attracts you to the book? What is it that makes you keep coming back to it again and again?
Well, when I first read it, I think I read it because it was a book by Belloc. So I'm a Catholic, and Belloc is a very famous Catholic writer, journalist, historian from the early middle 20th century.
Yes.
I'm a convert, Catholic convert. So when I joined the church, his name was one of the names that kept coming up, major British Catholic figures. And it just so happened that The Path to Rome was a book that was mentioned. So it was really just that was the reason why I first picked it up. Why I keep coming back to it? Well, ever since I first read it, I loved it completely. Some books I don't, but this one, straight off the bat, was a really good read, and it always stayed in my mind thereafter. But years passed, or some years passed, and one thinks about reading the book again and never quite gets round to it. I got to a stage where I wanted just to read more Belloc, and I was never getting around to it. And all I'd read was The Path to Rome once or twice. So what happened, I think around 2015, I decided, let's read this and let's read something else afterwards. And I barely managed that, to be perfectly honest. I'm so slow with my reading nowadays. I'm currently reading another of Belloc's travel logs, The Cruise of the Nona. I started that at some point last year. But nowadays I come back to it specifically, I think, because it's a pilgrimage. And I'm since my Camino experience in 2019, I'm very into the idea of pilgrimages. But also, actually, I do love travel logs, and I have since before 2019, thanks to reading The Path to Rome and other books like Time of Gifts by Patrick Leigh Fermor. So there's a spiritual element and a wanderlust, I guess, element that pulls me back. Here's a book that can take me out of my regular day.
Yes.
Or sometimes it feels like not going anywhere very fast. A guy who travels over 3 countries to Rome, which is this amazing city from the Catholic point of view, from the secular point of view, or pagan, if you like, because of ancient Rome. And it's just a really funny, good read. Belloc can be, in his other writings, quite a not hard going, but good cop, bad cop. His great friend, G.K. Chesterton, was the good cop.
Yes.
Belloc was kind of the bad cop. He's all about Catholic militancy and all of that. And this was a book, The Path to Rome, where we see almost Belloc at play.
Yeah.
But more than that, a vulnerable side to Belloc as well. So he's not just laying down the law on the Catholic Church is right in everything, and you're wrong. He's opening his heart up a bit, and I'm really fond of that. I get on with that very well. So yeah, those are some of the reasons.
I do know a story of Belloc that when he stood for Parliament, and I don't know whether it was because he was French, wasn't he, or French born?
He was French born. He's Anglo-French.
Anglo-French, yes.
Born there, brought up here.
When he stood for Parliament, in this country, I hasten to add, for those who thought it might have meant France. There was some disquiet because of his French birth might have played some part, but a lot of people seem to be perturbed by his Catholicism. So he actually said, he straight out in an address to voters. I'm trying to remember something I read over 20 years ago. So if I get some facts wrong, I apologise.
I know what you're about to say very well.
He said to address the voters, yes, I'm a Catholic, and this is what I'm. I make I have no shame in it. And if you fail to elect me, I will thank God personally. I will thank God that he has spared me from representing bigots.
Yeah, you're more or less right. Yeah, he got out his rosary beads and said, "These are my beads. I tell them every day.
Yeah,
I'm a Catholic. I'm proud of this."
Yeah,
and like you say, if you don't, like you said, if he said to them, if you don't vote for me because of that, or don't like me because of that, I'll thank God for sparing me the indignity of being elected, so on and so forth. Yeah. That was 1904, 1905.
1906 would have been the January, or in the run up to the January 1906 general election.
It was an indignity to him anyway to go to Parliament. He wasn't at all happy there.
It was a brief time. It was only a brief time he was an MP, wasn't he? He's one of those people who was a member of Parliament, but it's far more famous for what he did not being a member of Parliament than rather than.
He's a bit like Rory Stewart. He not a career politician.
No,
he went there with a particular purpose, perhaps, and when he was thwarted in it, or he saw the way people behaved, Rory Stewart probably didn't get the jobs he really wanted there. And when things didn't work out for him, rather than hang around on the backbenches, he said, right, well, I'm off. But I think Rory Stewart just wasn't going to hang around with Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party. Belloc just wasn't going to hang around with the whole of Parliament being the rather debatable institution that he saw it as being. These people not affecting much change and corruption and all the rest of it. He probably should never have applied in the first place, but perhaps it was an itch that he needed to scratch. And I think the world and he were better served by him being out of it. It's probably the same with Rory Stewart, actually. But so he was there briefly, I think, for the Liberal Party until 1911.
During the Campbell Bannerman Asquith era.
Right. So but the Path to Rome, it covers his pilgrimage a few years earlier in June 1901. So a bit earlier than that.
Oh wow. So what? How much do you identify with Belloc then, given that he?
Not actually, as a Catholic, not that much. I suppose I would identify more with Chesterton, to be honest. I'm not as funny as him, unfortunately. I'm not as big-hearted as him, I think. But he's such a soft personality, and he's someone I look at and I think, I relate to that, and I wish I was more like that. I would never want to be the hard Catholic militant that Belloc really was. But sometimes, there's a place for people like that, and I do like his stridency on occasion. So, I mean, perhaps that's a bit of the tough guy. He had the tough guy approach, and you sometimes think, well, gosh, I wish I was like, when you watch an action film, I wish I was like that guy. And in spiritual terms, it's a bit like that with Belloc. But I wouldn't say I identify with him. Particularly. Not in the way that, I don't feel quite as close to him as I do people like Chesterton, and even more so C.S. Lewis. Those two much more so.
You can never go far wrong with C.S. Lewis, I find.
That's true.
There have been some famous Christians who have been turned out to be a bit of a letdown over the years, but see, actually, that's almost setting up for a fall, because in saying that, some years down the line, something awful might be discovered about it.
Well, I mean,
but,
60 years.
but having come from an evangelical beginning to my faith, obviously there are some American Christian writers who, or speakers or whatever, who I noticed in the mid-90s or so, who I thought highly of. And they turned out to be Trump supporters, a lot of them. So
yeah.
I have this sense of I'm being let down by people. And so, it's nice every so often to come across, people who don't. Yeah, and with me, Lewis is one of those people.
That's because he really didn't talk about, say, his politics very much.
No.
He was probably a conservative.
He was a conservative, but that's probably been discovered in his private letters.
Yeah, but he wisely and deliberately kept away from that, because he was the idea of mere Christianity. So he wanted to focus on all the ideas that are common to Christians.
Yes.
That's his only difference, I suspect, with American, say, right-wing Christian writers.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, I suppose, in a sense, if one's favorite writer supports a different party, but why does one like them in the first place? Is it because of the politics or something else? If it's something else, then I would say, well, I would just personally let that go and say, okay, yeah, that's where they were politically, but that's not why I'm here with them in their book, as it were.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would. There are many great artists of all kinds of stripes from the past that, by today's standards, by our standards, awful people. But if we started saying, well, I'm not going to like him or her because of his politics or whatever, something they did, you'd never listen to anyone or read anything or look at any paintings or whatnot. That's I'd let that go, and that's what I do with Belloc. As with any writer, if I see something I don't like that he's written, say, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, in The Cruise of the Nona, he's talking about how highly he regards Mussolini.
Yeah, which is enough to make people shudder slightly, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but this is the 20s, before it all went badly wrong. Having said that, still, Mussolini in the 20s, Belloc perhaps should have known better.
Well, particularly when there was one for I think it was Matteo, one famous socialist MP, disappeared and then was discovered to be murdered 8 days after he denounced Mussolini in the Italian parliament.
Right. So especially because it's not a religious thing, it's political. You just got to say, okay, he got it wrong.
Yeah.
He got lots of things wrong, Belloc. There's a thick strain of anti-Semitism in him. In his writings, although he tries to say, no, okay, contextualize it. It's not as bad as it seems, Governor. He got that wrong. Okay, he's pre-World War II, but Christians at any time of period shouldn't be hanging around with those ideas. I think one just has to say, okay, you take what you can from his writings and reject the rest. There's no shame in that.
I am listening.
There's no need to reject the whole thing, the whole person. I think that's not a mature view. Unfortunately, I suspect it's one that no few people hold to in today's age, their search for social justice.
It was also Belloc, where I think he had a do you know what his views were in his last years and that? Because he died after World War II. So you would have seen the full horror of Nazism and fascism.
Yeah, he died in 1953, I think.
Yes.
But in his last years, his mind went. I don't know if he had dementia, but or pardon me, of what kind? But he was going senile,
Yes.
and I think one son died in World War One, another died in World War Two, and that probably, as a Catholic force or force in letters, that did it for him. So in his later years, whatever he was saying wouldn't, I think, be worth that much as being representative of his thought, because his mind had gone too much. He wasn't just completely out of it, but he was old and too damaged by some of these things that had happened. And I suppose, the physical ravages as well. He was along the, so far as I can tell, he was prior to that, along the lines of, well, I have friends for Jews. That kind of, Jews are some of my best friends, so on and so forth. But
which is always a bad lie. The person who says it thinks it's a get out, but it's some of my best friends is a bad line, it's really.
Not a convincing one. When his mind was going, that again, he would happily, or not happily, but he would blame Jews for this or that or the other. Now, was the dementia revealing some truth about him, or was it just playing on an old prejudice that wasn't really a big or deep part of him? Probably somewhere in the middle. The last years, in terms of his thought, they're not years I think to consider too deeply. Although if one does, then you have to realize he was medically very unfit by then.
And I mean, I don't know if I know certainly, because I've known more than one person in my family who've had one form of dementia or another. It does, some cases it does appear out of nowhere, but in other cases you do sort of see it slowly creep through.
Right.
And obviously you can, with things like, in the case of Belloc, perhaps that, people wouldn't perhaps notice that so much as, at the time even. But,
thinking about that, well, I've read one good biography of his life, or one biography, Joseph Pearce's, and I get the impression from there it didn't hit him like that. It was over years. Joseph Pearce says perhaps the fall of France, because Belloc lived in West Sussex and loved Sussex dearly, but always continued to love France. He says maybe that was a shock that really tipped him over the edge, or helped him along, as it were. I think other people would disagree with that from what I've read. But it wasn't, I don't get the impression it was very sudden. It was over him. He was an old man by then, into his 70s and 80s. He'd been through a lot in life. He lost his wife just prior to the First World War.
They weren't mad. They were mad for only about 8 years, weren't they?
Probably a bit longer. I can't remember now. It's 10, 11 years. I'd have to look that up. But they loved each other dearly, dearly, dearly. And so her loss, which was over about, I think, her illness from start to finish was over a month, 2 months. It's pretty quick. I don't think we know what it was. Perhaps cancer of some kind. But I don't know how. I don't think he really recovered from that.
No.
Unfortunately. What
do you think Belloc would have made of the profound and significant changes in the Roman Catholic Church after World War II? Imagining that he remained mentally sound and lived to see the Second Vatican Council, do you think he would have been opposed to it? Do you think he would have welcomed it?
Well, it's a good question, because Belloc was what they call an ultramontane Catholic, really. If the Pope said it, that's fine by him.
Yeah.
If the Pope said it was raining when the skies were blue, Belloc say, "Yeah, I accept that." He said that once. I'm not sure he didn't say it tongue in cheek because he's too smart to think otherwise. But he was certainly a dead-on Catholic.
Yeah.
What he would have done, I think he would have suffered greatly, spiritually and emotionally. And well, this is just me saying it.
Yeah.
But I take as my cue the reaction of people like Tolkien and Evelyn Waugh, especially, who they loved the church as it was.
Yeah.
And they were not at all happy with what happened.
No.
A good question would be, if Belloc might have, if he had lived long enough, you'd have been very old. He was born in 1870, so perhaps.
Yes, he would have been 92 to 90.
I'm thinking after Vatican II, you have Marcel Lefebvre leaving, or getting kicked out, really.
Well, didn't he get excommunicated by John Paul II?
I think you're right.
After very many years of being,
he ordained bishops, and the Pope said at that point, right, enough's enough.
Yeah.
Would Belloc have joined him? It's a moot question because he would have been.
By which time he would have been 118.
Yeah, so I think he would have. I don't think he would have left the church over it, but I think he would have suffered grievously because of it. We can never really know. But it's a question I've thought about before, and I've thought about the popes who were alive in his own time, but there is no one like John the 23rd, who brought about such radical change as John did in 62 or in the late 50s.
And no one expected it, because the thing about the conclave after Pius XII's death, if rumour is to be believed, the cardinals were deadlocked between the various factions, and they decided what they needed was a very elderly, inoffensive cardinal to be Pope, who would only last a few years, and he wouldn't do anything, would just be a seat warmer, and will give them time to consider something else. And of course, John the 23rd was very elderly. Yes, he didn't last that long, but you could hardly call him a seat warmer.
That's true. I mean, the real candidate in 58, I think, was it 58 or 59?
58.
Was Montini. But I don't think
he wasn't a cardinal then.
He wasn't a cardinal, so he couldn't be elected. So he was meant to be a seat warmer for Montini, basically.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, when he died, Montini, I forget his first name, came in and became Paul VI.
Giovanni Battista Montini.
Giovanni, right? So, similarly, Francis, not a seat warmer, but he was installed, I think, really because they thought that he would be able to deal with the WikiLeaks scandal and get the Vatican in order. Well, I mean, he's doing stuff, whether it's really in order, I don't know. Of course, he's going off here and there in ways that perhaps were unexpected.
Yeah.
But as for Belloc, there were no popes like John in his time, so it's really hard to say how he would have reacted to
there was
someone like that.
Pius in his lifetime, there would have been Pius IX, Pius IX, Leo XIII, Pius X, Benedict XV, Pius XI, and Pius XII.
That's right. Yeah. So
all fairly ultra conservative. I mean, Leo XIII is seen as fairly liberal, but
secular terms, yes. Leo supported unions.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's why I said in Leo's case, then you can hardly say.
So Belloc loved his encyclical Viva Novarum, talking about economics and politics. But I'm quite glad that he didn't, in a way, that he didn't live to see Vatican II, because I don't think he would have liked that at all.
Yeah.
So,
So one thing I have noticed there's a thread of connection between the two books we're studying. In that, having mentioned about Belloc, is that Shackleton also stood for Parliament,
Right.
and in the same general election, 1906. However, Shackleton stood as a Liberal Unionist, which was like the SDP to the Conservatives, Liberals in those days, because Liberal Unionists had broken away from the Liberals and were in a sort of pact with the Conservatives, and they ended up being merged into the Conservatives. But politics wasn't really Shackleton's thing, and he wasn't good at it, and he lost. He failed to get elected as a member of Parliament,
Lucky man.
which was good for him because that was before he led any expeditions.
Right.
So the book I've chosen, which I've read recently, is Sir Ranulph Fiennes, which, as you know, and a lot of viewers will know, is a renowned polar explorer himself. Fiennes was the first to traverse across the globe from top to bottom and go around, rather with Greenwich as the meeting point,
Yeah.
as opposed to circular. And so a lot of what he says in this biography is from the perspective. The author is writing from the perspective of someone who has done polar expeditions himself and has the scars to prove it. Literally, in some cases, he snipped off one of his fingers worth of frostbite. So that's the book I've chosen, which is fairly official. Is there anything you want to ask about this, or?
Okay, so I guess we'll start the same way that we started with Belloc. Why have you chosen it? What about it and Shackleton appeal to you?
That's a good question, because I didn't expect. I think partly because I read it recently, and that's connected to why does it. I mean, obviously there are a number of books I've read recently, but why did I just pick this? Why does Shackleton appeal to me? Well, polar exploration, the history of polar exploration, does appeal to me. I don't fully know why. There's probably some psychological reason about going into the great unknown and fighting against the odds, but looking at it from the comfort of hindsight and from a living room with a warm fire, as opposed to the freezing sub-zero temperatures they had to deal with.
Yeah.
But Shackleton is a hero of mine for the same reason, and he was a very flawed hero. His private life was a mess. He was a womanizer, as far from what we can gather. His personal businesses, finances were just like, if you've ever seen a mini series about the endurance expedition with Kenneth Branagh as Shackleton, you get a glimpse of the chaotic private life that he had.
Right.
But and yet, out there in the wilderness, he was so laser focused on some things. It was true. He wasn't that brilliant. In that none of what he aimed to do in his expeditions fully happened. I mean, closest in success was the first expedition he led, which was the aim to be the first at the South Pole. That took difficulty because Captain Scott, who had led a previous expedition on which Shackleton was on, wasn't able to get out of the Royal Navy to do the expedition he wanted to finish the job. And there's Shackleton, someone who was on a previous expedition that he led, suddenly wanting to lead his own expedition, and he put forward parameters on Shackleton. You are not to have your base at McMurdo Sound. You are not to say it. This is my area. And in the Victorian Edwardian years, and this is horrible when you think about it, because this is in life and death situations, you would get explorers who, some would be couldn't care less, but you would get others. And Scott was like this. And Robert Peary, the person who supposedly was at the North Pole, but nearly everyone in the books had a similar attitude, as in, this is where I lead my expeditions from. No other explorers allowed here. Unless I'm needing them. But because of when they went to the where Shackleton proposed to go, and the whole ice had been carved and everything, it was a choice: either break his word to Scott or face creditors back home and walk away from a whole expedition. And Shackleton wisely chose the decision to go ahead and use McMurdo Sound and build his own base there, which was about 20 miles from Scott's old base or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact mileage, but not far. And Edward Wilson, who is a friend of both Scott and Shackleton, was so disgusted he never spoke to Shackleton again. And yet that was the expedition where Shackleton, or not without reproach anyway, Shackleton was successful to a degree in that he got, there was the men who were under him, who did their own miniature expedition, did amazing things. They were the first to reach the summit of Mount Erebus, which was about 13,000 feet, which is nearby. Another three men went and became the first at the magnetic South Pole. Shackleton did this big, huge leap of distance between the previous furthest south, which was 82.17 degrees south, to 88.23 degrees south, which is a difference of about 360 miles, whichever, which is a big leap in that. So, but as he said, all this, but not the pole. And the reason they turned back is they realized time was against them. They had to be back by the 1st of March because that's when the relief ship was to leave them and they were to be considered dead. This is what Shackleton had ordered. The Antarctic wind, he didn't want to be on the ice barrier in March, which was exactly what happened to Scott because of, the potential bad weather. And also they didn't have enough food to get to the pole and back alive. But they went as far as they could.
Yeah.
One of the three men who went with Shackleton said had they trudged an extra mile, they would not have gone back. That was how close they got to the margin. So Shackleton does all these incredible things, and he has these incredible, and then of course we know the endurance when he brought all those men back after their ship sank, and he wanted to be the first to cross the Antarctic continent. It's like his expeditions in themselves failed, but he brought something incredible and heroic out of it.
Yeah. And so the Shackleton we know today is really this great heroic figure.
Yes.
Survived against the odds when things went all pear-shaped, went badly wrong.
Yeah.
Was in his... did this Shackleton come out of the blue? Cometh the man, cometh the moment, or cometh the moment, cometh the man? Or can we see signs of this heroic Shackleton from his early years, or from when he was a young man?
I think you can sort of see it always in him. It's just a chance for it to show itself. Yeah. You see it early enough in Scott's Discovery expedition.
But what about when Shackleton was a kid, a boy? Was he then, or growing up?
Not heavily so from what I've read.
Right.
Other people who've read it might have spotted things I haven't, but no, not that I saw. He was one. He is certainly in terms of confidence. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, right. In terms of winning people over, yes. But the sheer heroism, that obviously came later. I mean, you do see a sign when the Discovery expedition, when Scott, Wilson, and Shackleton went to the furthest south, but Shackleton came down with scurvy, and they nearly died. And there was a rumor, I don't know if this is true, that Shackleton overheard Wilson tell Scott that he didn't think Shackleton would last the night. And that Shackleton said this over a decade later, pointing out that he was still alive, whereas Wilson and Scott weren't. I don't know how true that is, because some of this, is conjecture from, and there's, people who are, at the time, people who are pro-Scott were not pro-Shackleton, and people who are pro-Shackleton were not pro-Scott. You do get some today who are supportive of both, but both men were incredible explorers and had incredible gifts, but both also had flaws.
Yeah.
It's just Scott's flaws are more noticeable than Shackleton's, and Shackleton's heroism's more noticeable than Scott's.
What's Shackleton's big flaw? Was as an explorer.
As an explorer,
Yeah.
because I was thinking, where do you begin? Because as a human being, you're plenty.
Well, yeah.
Womanizing,
bad with money, but yeah. I mean, did he have any as an explorer, or was he a terrific leader?
He was a terrific leader, and he knew how to persuade and cajole people. He had made a great salesman, but he, as a leader, where he had flaws. He rushed. He wasn't as precise in preparation as he could have been.
Right.
He was precise in preparation of getting people once they're stuck in a hole. But part of the reason they would sometimes be in a hole was because he was not careful. Yeah. He rushed into things.
Okay.
Sometimes his judgment might have been thought. I mean, also he was, with the endurance expedition, he was very unforgiving. He denied the Albert Medal to 4 members of the endurance expedition who he felt had let down the expedition. One of them was the ship's carpenter, Henry McNeish. Now, I can understand on what I'm about to say why Shackleton refused him the Polar Medal, because McNeish just about led a mutiny on the ice after the ship had sunk, when they were getting before the ice broke up, when they were getting the boats across, when some of the men were starting to think, what's the point, we're all going to die. It looked like the Franklin expedition, only the southern version of the Franklin expedition was about to happen.
Yeah.
But it didn't. But that was because of Shackleton. But McNeish, and he refused to push a boat any further. And Shackleton then went and had words with him. How dare you? Who gave you the authority to do that? And then Shackleton did his coup de grace, no pun intended. He said, and in this environment, you've got to take that extremely seriously. If I find you're a danger to myself and my men, I will have you shot.
Right.
And McNeish took him at his word. But also on that basis, I can understand why Shackleton refused McNeish the Albert Medal. Shackleton made sure that McNeish and McCarthy and Vincent, who is sort of the number 2 in that incident, and Vincent, I think, is a pretty unpleasant individual, were with him on the crossing to South Georgia, because he wanted them out the way from the men who were there behind. But McNeish made sure that the boat was fitted especially so it would make that crossing.
Mm.
And he left McNeish in charge of those who were unable to make the crossing over the mountains of South Georgia. On that, I would be prepared. And McNeish didn't say a bad word against Shackleton after the incident in the ice. On that basis, perhaps Shackleton could have been a bit more forgiving. But I can understand why he made the decision he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the thing people forget, that we look at it with hindsight. These were very dangerous expeditions. People like Amundsen made it look like a war. I mean, Amundsen made his conquest of the South Pole like a skiing holiday, almost, because it was so meticulously organized. He made it look easy.
Yeah.
We forget that, but it's incredible.
It's certainly the mark of the curse of a leader. I know that T. Lawrence and Patrick Leigh Fermor in the First and Second World Wars had to execute people on their own side for misdemeanors. Lawrence had to shoot a Bedouin who had caused trouble among the Bedouin that were with him in the desert. and I think Lee Verma had to shoot a Cretan. I need to check that out, but I'm pretty sure that happened.
Yeah.
And they had done something awful, and both people couldn't be kept in the camp any longer or
No.
be allowed to leave.
No.
So yeah, McNeish, well, he dodged a bullet literally there by doing what he was told, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Shackleton, he knew what hard leadership was, or
It
what
was.
leadership could amount to.
And it was at great personal cost to him, physically and emotionally.
I bet. Yeah.
He was a heavy drinker. I don't know
Right.
whether he was an alcoholic, but he was a very heavy drinker.
Right.
The last thing he ever heard, just about the last words he ever heard, were from his doctor when his fatal heart attack was coming along, and his doctor was saying, Shackleton said, "You're always saying I have to give up things. What should I be giving up now?" And he said, "Principally drinking. I don't think it does you any good." But this is the thing, Shackleton had developed heart disease. We don't know. He refused to let doctors examine him, I think because he feared, I mean, Scott classified him effectively as an invalid. He invalided him home after, the journey south when he, from the scurvy, and Shackleton felt really hurt at that. And one of the reasons he wanted to go back with an expedition led by him, Shackleton, was to prove Scott wrong. He was not because when Scott published his book, he made Shackleton out to be a complete invalid.
Right.
Who Wilson and Scott had practically carried. And Shackleton therefore refused to let doctors examine him properly. And he very likely developed, it was thought when they did the autopsy on him, because he died at the start of the fourth expedition, a quest, which was, I think, to look for undiscovered islands across the Antarctic coast.
Which year was that?
1922, start 1922, but they barely got to South Georgia, which isn't even in the Antarctic, when Shackleton had his fatal heart attack, just weeks before what would have been his 48th birthday. Really? So that was how, and when they did the autopsy, found he had heart disease going back many years. Yeah. And they suspected at the time, but he refused to let anyone examine him. And they think it might have, the heart problems may have begun in earnest during that attempt at the South Pole in 1908/09.
Right. So that's the endurance exhibition, is it?
No, the Nimrod expedition, the one where he made an attempt at the South Pole. The endurance, he they didn't get as far as Vashel Bay in the part of the Antarctic when the ship got caught in the ice. And Shackleton. 1914 to 16 was the endurance expedition.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay.
So, but it's incredible. One side story to that was there was a secondary group, as you would expect with a crossing of the Antarctic continent, who went to the Ross Ice Shelf, and they were to lay depots for Shackleton and his men. And their ship lost its anchor and got caught in the ice field, and eventually that sailed safely to New Zealand, but they were trapped. But they just realised, we can't rely on ourselves. Shackleton needs us. Not knowing Shackleton was trapped, having his own battle, trapped in endurance, they went and laid depots for Shackleton as far as the Transantarctic Mountains. And that's a heroic story in itself, because 3 men in that expedition died.
Right.
So Shackleton, he did have major health problems that he hid. It did cost him these constant exposure. I'm sure if he wasn't in financial problems, if he didn't drink heavily, if he didn't smoke as much as he did, and he didn't exert itself to the way that he did on his expeditions, I think he would have lived considerably longer.
I mean, he's been happy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, his wife, who was several years older than him, outlived him by about nearly 20 years. Right. Interestingly, when they decided to ship his body back, and they only got as far as Montevideo, I think, in Uruguay, when she sent a cable back saying he'd send his body back to be buried in South Georgia because he'll want to be near the men and near the wilderness that he loved so much. So that's what happened.
Buried down there.
Yeah, but his family all thought highly of it. I mean, almost an echo of Captain Scott, Sir Peter Scott, being involved. His career was in wildlife.
Yeah, I've heard.
You probably know, yeah. But obviously some of that turned to polar areas. Likewise, Sir Ernest Shackleton had a son who was famous in his own field, Teddy Shackleton, in that he went into politics. He was a Labour MP, and then he ended up being a peer, and then was in the cabinet under Hal Wilson for a short while as leader of the House of Lords.
Right.
But like Sir Peter Scott, Lord Shackleton was involved in various Antarctic groups that, sort of representing his father's legacy.
That's good.
So, both of Scott and Shackleton had sons who were famous in other fields, but, remained very devoted to what their respective fathers did.
Yeah, in that respect, then he had more luck than Belloc, who had several children.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mentioned 2 sons who died in the wars.
Yeah.
He had another son who really fell out with him very badly.
Yeah.
And ended up moving to America.
Yeah.
Lived in California. And there were some daughters, grandchildren. One became a nun. His family line is still going. He lived in a place called Kingsland.
Yeah.
In West Sussex, near Shifty. The property is called Kingsland or Kingsland. And I think it's a great grandson, something like that, who still lives there today.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, that's pretty neat. I've been down that way, so the house is not a museum or anything. It's still lived-in property. It's kind of a shame because I'd love to go inside.
Yes, but, it's not like the Kilns, which is a working place as well. But it's...
knock on the door and ask for a tour.
Yeah.
Though I imagine it looks completely different to Lewis's because it's a working house now.
Yeah.
They haven't tried to keep it as it was in his time.
Yeah.
Kingsland, I imagine, would be the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting how it works out with families.
Yes. Indeed. Well, it's been quite a interesting evening talking about 2 very different people.
Yeah, very much.
These discussions are never fully.
Both sound like there were points of connection in their committedness to the things they believed in.
Yes.
Both had their flaws.
Yes.
But both were. Belloc was also. Was he a leader in his way? Not so sure about that. He certainly had some people who looked up to him.
More like a street fighter.
Oh yeah, he
looks like one. Whilst you were talking about Belloc, I was looking him up as well. And the photos of him, he looks like
he never took part in those kind of sports. He's a big walker, obviously. But he could look after himself, I imagine, if push came to shove.
Yeah.
Some surprising people became friends with him. So if he wasn't a leader, he was certainly an inspirational person. Siegfried became a Catholic, albeit after he died, but with taking his inspiration from Belloc. Scawen Hunt, Wilfrid Scawen Hunt, Blunt, was reconciled to the church. Yeah. And I think Rupert Brooke, the poet, the First World War poet, was also inspired by him. So Belloc and Shackleton both, it seems, they committed, they were very inspirational for others, possibly after their deaths as well, you might say. both had, certainly big flaws, vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
They were. There's just three, I think, points of connection there between them. Although I don't know what they would have been like if they'd met each other. Who knows? I suppose they could have done.
Yeah.
Fascinating people.
Mm.
And if
I got a similar era as well, same generation.
Yeah. So if he was early 20s, if he died, Shackleton would have been about 10 years younger, I think 1880s.
No, well, Shackleton was born in 1874 and died in 1922.
Okay, right. So
he died just weeks before his 48th birth, what would have been his 48th birthday.
Okay, so he was, just 4 years younger than Belloc.
Yeah.
So pretty much same generation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, very different paths. Lonely paths as well, but not always alone, not usually actually alone. Fascinating people.
Yes.
Yeah. I would earnestly hope one day to walk in Belloc's footsteps to Rome. Not precisely, but go from Eastern France down to Rome on a pilgrimage. But if I can't do that, his book, that takes me there. I read it. I said earlier, I read it every year, specifically between the beginning of June and the 29th, the Feast of Peter and Paul, because that's when he walked the route. So the book, it's not split up into chapters, but you can tell where he begins and ends pretty much each day. So I read every day that day's section and then move on to the next one. It's the early chapters are really long. The later chapters are a lot shorter, reflecting the fact that he was getting a bit sick of it all by the end of the journey, the pilgrimage.
We all have those moments on any pilgrimage, don't we?
There are always bad days. That's when you really find out how much it means to you, whether you continue or not. But it isn't. It's just like in daily life. There are good days and bad days. But it's very concentrated because when you're on a pilgrimage, there's nothing to distract you from it. You got to keep going, just one foot in front of the other, which is what Shackleton would have had to have done.
And also in his case, his life was on the return journeys. His life depended on it. It's like what he planned was incredible. He knew when setting out on the Nimrod expedition to be first at the South Pole, he knew he would be breaking the furthest south. Not only would he reach the South Pole, but the furthest south beam before is about 360 something miles away from the South Pole. So that's a huge leap into the unknown in the days before radio or planes, anything to help. With the crossing of the Antarctic, they were landing in a part of the Antarctic and crossing an area that they didn't know about. So the journey to the South Pole, the first half, was a complete unknown. Then he would have to depend on, to an extent, on the depots and supplies left by others. And also no radio communication, no airdrops, nothing like that. And he would have to do it, cross the Antarctic in a single season. Because my goodness, you did not want to be out there in the elements during the winter, where it's constantly dark or semi-dark, and it's blowing. What's it out there? So to do all that is incredible. Or to plan to do that in the first place requires guts and
absolutely.
But
he was not short of courage.
No, certainly not short of courage.
And one of the last great explorers, all over by the middle of the century, by World War II.
Indeed.
Amazing.
Well, good to chat with you, Malcolm, and looking forward to our film review next week, which is
next week. Okay.
Yes, it's next week.
I better watch it.
Yeah, the Operation Mincemeat and Amundsen is still on iPlayer. And from what I've seen, Amundsen's fairly close to how things were. So it'll be what you think of his life story. I'd be fascinated to know.
Yeah, I know very little about him other than he beat Robert Falcon Scott, to the South Pole. So I shall be learning a lot for sure. And I can't wait to talk about Operation Mincemeat.
Oh yes, that's a great film.
And I have to say, I know we usually talk about James Bond films. So before we finish, I'll drop in a cheeky James Bond reference, or just to say, you know how it's his 60th anniversary this year?
It is, and we need to do something about that.
And cinemas are showing various or all of the films.
Yes.
And I saw on Twitter the other day from the Bond community that in Leicester Square, or just off it, a cinema showing License to Kill, my favorite, at the end of May. So I thought, I got to get a ticket to that before I spend all my money. So I did. So it was, I think, the first one I saw in the cinema. So I can't wait to go and see it again.
Well, we ought to have a look at that, and I'll see if I can see a Bond film at the cinema, myself in the meantime, which I'm aiming to do. Incidentally, in Operation Mincemeat, which is a true story, Ian Fleming features in the film because he was the one
much more heavily than I thought he would. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll have to talk about that because it's very quite significant.
Yeah.
So that's right. Good film. So
indeed.
I look forward to both of them.
Yeah. We'll see you next week, Malcolm.
Okay, look forward to it. See you, Paul.
And you. See you.
Bye.
Bye.